the DEI committee. I'm thrilled to have all our panelists and our moderator here today, and very grateful. We are delighted to be able to put together such an interesting and distinguished panel. Looking forward to hearing from all of you.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Victor Rios. I am a psychology postdoctoral fellow here at Mount Sinai. I use he, they pronouns, and I will be your moderator for today's discussion. So I just want to go ahead and welcome our distinguished panelists. So first we have the Reverend Mary Barber, MD, who uses she, her pronouns, and she is a transitional deacon in the Episcopal Church to be ordained a priest in September. So congratulations. Tony Muñoz-Hilliard identifies as he, him, and works as a peer counselor on the Mount Sinai Morningside West mobile outreach team. And Brielle Cardieri, I hope I'm saying that correct, is an MD who uses she, her pronouns, and she's a first-year psychiatry resident at the Mount Sinai Hospital. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us. If at any point during the panel anyone has discussions, please feel free to write it in the chat, and we will try our best to monitor that as well. So firstly, I'd like to ask each of you, and whoever would like to go first can, how would you define community for yourselves? I'll pick someone. Mary, could you let us know potentially how you define community?
Community is a group of people that find home together, that find common cause, support each other, care for each other. Community has gotten so shaken up for me because I still have my psychiatry circles. I still go to this group called Group for Advancement of Psychiatry. I'm on the LGBTQ committee, and I still find that to be a source of community. I'm glad that they didn't think I gave up my psychiatry card when I went to seminary. But now I have like a lot of more circles of community through seminary. And I know probably all of us in this room have circles of friends, of family, both family of origin, chosen family. Maybe you have a faith community too. So there's overlapping and different circles of community. And I think that, I don't know if others would agree with this, that the pandemic has sort of shaken that up and made some of those circles blur more.
How about for you, Tony?
Yeah, I just like to ditto what Mary just said. Community is, for me, a place where I can find a safe space to share, to go to community and find resources that will be helpful for myself and whatever I need. I think through the pandemic, I think my community has shifted, which is now, for the most part, it became, these boxes on my computer to be able to meet and share and support each other, through pandemic, and also, keeping relationships and sharing and supporting each other. So yeah, that's what community is for me.
Thank you. And how about for you, Brielle?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Mary and Tony shared. And just to share something slightly different and kind of from the perspective as someone who started residency during a pandemic, community for me has kind of turned into who I lean on in hard times. And that community has shifted throughout the pandemic in that, like, sometimes personal and social things that like lean on family and friends, but in training, talking through the hardships of residency, sometimes that feels more right and feels safer with people who I'm in training with. So instead of having a cohesive idea of community, I feel like I have built different communities to kind of meet different needs, which has been a change for me this year.
For that, and I think all of you touched on how, oh, sorry. Thought I saw your hand. I was gonna say, with the pandemic, and you guys are all talking about this, I think a lot of us also just lost physical connection to our communities. You know, with COVID, Pride marches were being canceled all around the country, all around the world. And so actually, in spite of this, I think many of us were able to kind of stand up to the challenge. And so I'm wondering how each of you were able to connect or work with your communities during this pandemic. I am going to switch up the order a little bit. So I'm going to ask Tony if you could start for us.
Sure. I mean, like I said, right, community happens for the most part in, you know, the screen in front of me. So during the pandemic, I joined a group that offers support through conversations in community. It is a global initiative. You know, we have people from all parts of the world, you know, and we just come together and we can talk about pandemic worries, relationships, work related, and we use our own experiences, right, to be able to support others and not give solutions or anything, but just using our own experiences of how we have overcome a different obstacle or situation. And I think that really has helped me in, you know, building new relationships from, you know, all over the world. And, you know, whether it's in Spanish, French, English, or whatever language, right? Just to be able to talk to different people all over the world and see how they have dealt with the pandemic and whatever other struggles they have had. So being able to be a part of this community and being trained in facilitating these types of community meetings has been very helpful and has helped me with my overall health, just to be able to talk to somebody when, you know, I can't easily reach somebody. So that has been the way that I've been able to stay in community for myself.
Excellent. Thank you for that. How about for you, Brielle?
I think my experience might be a little bit different than other people's here in that I'm like a lifelong New Yorker. So I have a lot of friends and family that are still here. And the areas in which like me and my friends live got hit pretty hard by COVID. So almost everyone that I know had it, but which that made it kind of nice because then it felt safer to meet up with them if we were like meeting up in a park. But in terms of how I approached community and friendship differently, I would say that I noticed myself being a lot more intentional about my friendships and about creating time and space for people that I didn't necessarily make time and space for before, because I would like walk to school and would run into someone and then it would kind of organically flow from there. So I was very intentional about hanging out with lifelong friends from outside of school, whether it be through like a Netflix party or through like meeting up in the park when that became a little bit safer. But also creating time and space to get to know my co-residents, because building that community I knew would support me through the next 4 years. So kind of thinking through what I wanted my community and what I wanted my friendships to look like and how I would spend that time with them and spend that time with them in a safe way is something that I never really had to think about before, but is something that I thought about a lot this year and continue to think a lot about. And I think it also will be something that I carry forward because I like the way that my friendships have grown with more intentional thinking.
Great. And how about for you, Mary?
I agree very much with both what Tony and Brielle said. I'm in a situation not totally unlike Brielle in that for the past 3 years, I've been at Union Theological Seminary. I just graduated. And the first 1.5 years of that I did in person on campus. And the second 1.5 years, I moved back upstate to Newburgh, New York, and did the rest virtually online. And what happened when Union's a small school, when the pandemic hit, there was concern that some of the housing is dorm housing and would they have to shift people around. And in fact, somebody in International House that was housing some of the Union students did die of COVID. So we were encouraged very strongly and not very smoothly or nicely to get the heck out. And so we were scattered all over the country. And there's significant number of young people at Union, significant number of queer and non-binary folks who are figuring out their identities. And now some of them were home with families of origin and not in the most supportive environment or where they would ideally want to live. There's also a lot of people at Union. It's very religiously diverse. It's not just ecumenical, but it's interfaith. People are mostly very committed to social justice, and some people are not even sure what their religious affiliation is. Some of them grew up evangelical and are kind of feeling traumatized by that. Some people are multiple belongers, like one parent was Jewish and one parent was Christian, and they don't know what their affiliation is. So very, very diverse group of people. And I was one of the chapel ministers. Union, like any seminary, has chapel, but it's a much more diverse chapel than a lot of graduate schools or seminaries would have. And so it could be anything. Prior to the pandemic, we had a little bit of a social media presence, but after the pandemic, we were totally on social media. We would broadcast over Zoom and simultaneously do Facebook Live. And so it became our source of community, much more so than when we were live. And we tried to bring in there's different caucuses, the Black Caucus and the Black Women's Caucus and the Queer Caucus and the Queer People of Color Caucus would run chapels. We tried doing some pre-recorded things where people could submit from wherever they were, like submit something for Earth Day and show your backyard as ways to feel connected. We did, for example, we did like dance and movement together. We did coloring together. We did some silent meditation together as chapel. We have a Buddhist caucus that is very active. There was one day that I did a house blessing chapel where I walked through my rooms of my home and people walked through their rooms of their apartment or home. And that made people feel connected in a really different way. There was one where for Passover, we baked matzah together live in the chapel. And so we tried to mix it up of different like things that were activity based and things that were more sharing, where people had to be more vulnerable, and also people could participate on Facebook Live if they didn't want to show themselves and be fully on Zoom. I could talk forever about this, but I think that gives you an idea. Oh, and one of the most popular chapels we did was a drag chapel, where I appeared in drag as Chad Manley that was the first time of me trying to do drag. And I did it to get my friend James's courage up. And I think I benefited as much or more as they did. And people found it spiritually nourishing as well as affirming of queer identity. So that was a real revelation to me. I'll just stop there.
I mean, that's also amazing. I'm also wondering, for example, we're still in the midst of the pandemic, but restrictions are starting to loosen. And so I'm kind of wondering how each of you, taking what you've learned and I mean, you all demonstrated such resourcefulness in this pandemic. What do you feel like you've learned about community during a pandemic, and how do you feel like you'd apply that to your own lives post-pandemic? This time we can start with Brielle.
Yeah, I think I learned how important community was. I think I took it a lot for granted, partially because as being a lifelong student, I was always around other people and was around a community. Sorry, the phone in my office is ringing. But like the pandemic forced me to be a little bit more intentional. Again, I keep using that word, but I really do think it resonates with me and resonates with how I now think about community and think about friendship. Sorry, I'm a little distracted by the phone. Maybe we can go to someone else for a second.
Okay, we can come back. How about for you, Mary?
I think that I resonate a lot with Brielle talking about intentionality. Definitely, there was more need to get in touch with people intentionally rather than because there was no talking to people between classes or those kind of casual things that would normally happen in school. And then what I said before about the lines being blurred a little bit, like, I said that some people had gone back to their families of origin. Well, some of those families started tuning into chapel, which obviously never happened when it was live. Somebody from Ohio or North Carolina wouldn't be able to see chapel live. Alumni started connecting. So that was like a new way that community blurred a little bit. And there was some staff at the school that were working from home that started tuning into chapel who hadn't really made the time to go to it when it was there on campus. But that was giving them a connection to the school that they didn't have because they were home and the students weren't there.
How about for you, Tony?
I think like everybody is being intentional, right? Celebrating, marriages and being in community when friends and family have lost their lives either due to the virus or through illness. So really trying to be present in celebrating a marriage, coming together and celebrating that and being there to comfort family and friends through their grief. And trying to be intentional with my family. I've had a long estrangement from my family, but I think this allowed me to be able to, start the process of reaching out and, try to form some type of relationship with my family. For me, being present for myself, right? Listening to what's going on with myself, keeping myself active, and when I am not feeling well, to respect that and bring the networks that I have established into in alignment with me and being able to share with them and getting their support. Just, amidst everything is celebrating, doing the celebrations and life is a celebration, death is a celebration as well. So, just supporting everybody.
Thank you for that. Brielle, I think it's safe to go back to you.
Yes, it's safe to go back to me. Sorry about that.
Okay.
kind of in line with what both Tony and Mary were saying, I feel like I've thought a lot more about how to support people than I've had before. And I think it's because as a young person who has not experienced a lot of tragedy and has friends who also have not experienced a lot of tragedy, this is the first time in our lives that a lot of things have been bad at the exact same time. So kind of figuring out where to meet people where they're at and how to best help them has been something that I've thought a lot about.
I think also what's important to consider is, I mean, even this panel, we're all embedded in a hospital system which is in and of itself a community. And so I'm wondering, being in a hospital system, how each of you have been able to identify or find a community or an LGBTQ identity or a community within a hospital system, which for some people can be very challenging. And so I'm wondering if we could start with Mary.
I feel like I'm sort of on the fringes of a hospital system. Now, I'm not exactly connected to a hospital, but I would say that, you know, one thing that's been really interesting that I think we've all kind of touched on, but not explicitly said, is that during this time, whether we're queer or not, we're kind of all going through this same collective trauma. We all hit certain marks where it was clear we were exhausted, or we were all baking bread, or, you know, there was a strange universality to the trauma that we were going through. And so like marking it across these different identities was important. And but it's also important to find your own communities where people deeply understand you. I would just say that out of this, I think that I've found that it's good to have more than one circle. That it's I very much agree with Brielle about intentionality and about seeking out who you know, do I really want to speak to about this thing, or who do I want to celebrate, you know, as Tony's saying, this milestone, whether it's a happy milestone or a point of grief. And who do I want to, you know, have a ritual together around this special day or this anniversary? And this might be different groups of people. And, you know, so we have, that's, you know, that's one of the reasons we have these different caucuses at Union. And in my psychiatry world, how we have these different committees in my group for advancement of psychiatry is really helpful for establishing different communities.
Tony?
I think, you know, yeah, like Mary was saying, right, there's different places to find community. I think for me, you know, being open and, you know, being a gay male, I think for, you know, the first time is working in a environment, in a system where I can express and be freely who I am, right? I unfortunately didn't experience that in a previous employment. So that was a very hard thing for me. But I mean, I think, you know, the relationships that I've made here with my coworkers, you know, has really helped. And, you know, empowered me and encouraged me just to be who I am and, you know, enjoy that and, you know, share with them, you know, my personal life. And, you know, I mean, I do it in the work that I do, right? You know, I come across individuals that are struggling with sexuality, sexual abuse, drug or alcohol use. So, you know, being able to have the support of my co-workers, administration, and being able to use my lived experience in that way. And, like Mary said, is, community for me happens in all dimensions of my life. So, I'm very well supported. So yeah, thank you.
Can I just add one thing to that, which is, like what Tony is saying is really, there's another piece to that, which is that once you're out and you feel comfortable with yourself, you're right, it's such an important thing to model for patients who are struggling with that. And so those of us who go around with a rainbow sticker on our ID or whatever, identifying that we're open or talking about our family life. So this past summer, I had a summer job at a rural hospital around here on an inpatient psych unit. And I think it was unusual that I, came in out, because I've been out for so long, I'm not gonna not talk about it. And I did an in-service for social workers about LGBTQ mental health. And it's a model for employees who may not see that as even an option. And for patients.
Thank you for bringing light to that. Brielle, I'm wondering if there's anything that you would like to add.
Yeah, I feel like I can speak a lot about being embedded within the hospital system, because as an intern, I am so physically embedded like all the time, and also kind of emotionally embedded. But I was also lucky in that I was a medical student at Mount Sinai, and obviously pre-pandemic, I had the opportunity to make a lot of queer connections and connect with the queer community. So I was part of like medical student groups. I was part of hospital-wide groups that I believe are still organizing meetups, but are more like for safety concerns are over Zoom now. But hopefully as time goes on and as more people are vaccinated, we'll start to be in person. But I feel like that, like intentionally still being connected with those groups and hanging out with the people that I met during those groups, or because a lot of us are residents right now, and because a lot of us are in the hospital, like even if I'm on the inpatient psych service and they might be on inpatient medicine, we'll still like try and meet up for lunch, or we'll meet up when we're both on night float. So there's like a way to create community in spaces where it feels like because of schedules or because of the pandemic, it would be really hard to.
Yeah, Mary, I also want to continue the discussion that you had brought up in terms of just building community with coworkers and doing in-services. And I'm also thinking of patients, for example. Many of them were no longer able to see their providers in person. Many were also talking about, I have no, like I'm just in my house all day with no one to talk to. I'm kind of reflecting on last year's Pride Month, and I'm wondering how you guys all handled those conversations or similar conversations with patients who were also yearning to find their own communities. I'm wondering if we could start with, I think I haven't started with Tony in a while.
Yeah, that's that's been difficult, right? Especially working in the hospital and meeting people that are either in crisis or experiencing their symptoms because unable to go out, or families preventing them from going out because they're afraid that if they go out, they might come back with the virus and pass it on to the other family members. So it's having those discussions. I was lucky that I as soon as I was able to come back to the office, I chose to do that, right? Because I could see that I was starting to feel you know, the onset of my depression, I get it just by staying at home, you know, being in front of the computer. And I'm also attending classes. So, you know, I needed to go out and I couldn't. So, you know, sharing these things with the people that, you know, that we were working with, you know, just being able to go out and either take a bike ride or go out into a park and, you know, just sit there. Yeah, I mean, I think that was, you know, that has been very difficult for a lot of people. And I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are involved, right? Not only ourselves, but now we have to look at, you know, our community, right? Our community being our social networks, our family networks. So, you know, there's a responsibility with that. So how, you know, how do you balance that when, you know, you're feeling like the walls are coming up, but they're not, right? They're still there. They're keeping you in. Just being able to support people through that, right? Just being able to talk, sharing life experiences, you know, sitting with them, sitting with that discomfort, you know, and, you know, getting to that untold story, right? Because sometimes it's not just, you know, being confined to the apartment, but it's relationships that begin to fray. It's, you know, lack of funding, you know, the fear of losing your housing. All of these things come into play because, you know, we're all dealing with this. And if we don't have the resources, the community to be able to talk about that in a not judgmental, open mind process where we can sit there and engage and have a conversation, be intentional, be reflective, in our way of holding each other, you know, has hopefully helped many. I know it's helped me. So thank you.
How about for you, Brielle?
I think I totally agree with what Tony is saying. And I think naively in the beginning of the pandemic, because it wasn't my personal experience, I almost didn't understand how difficult it was for a lot of people. And what I mean by that is basically as soon as the pandemic hit, we were asked to graduate medical school early to work on COVID floors. So I was like physically going to work, interacting with people out of my house every single day. So when it started to get deeper into the pandemic and I would see a lot of patients in crisis who would come and basically identify that their entire source of stress or their suicidality or their depression was directly related to the COVID pandemic, whether it was financially, whether it was by having to spend a lot of time in the house together, whether it was that they were queer, like Mary was saying, and went back to live with their families at home who may not have been supporting them. So kind of seeing that so many people's lived experiences were very different than my own and that it was really, really hard for them, it made me question how I can have impact and how I can be helpful. And to me, I find comfort in like actionable things. So I decided that I wanted to volunteer for the Trevor Project. And intern years is very busy. So I've been doing the training very, very slowly, but I'm in the process of training to be a counselor because I think that especially during times like this where people really need outlets and have people to talk to, particularly within the queer community, particularly with young people in the queer community who may still be figuring out their identities or still may be figuring out kind of how they want to navigate their relationships and particularly their relationship with their family if they're still living at home, was something that was really important to me.
Thank you. And thank you for volunteering for the Trevor Project. They're wonderful. How about for you, Mary?
I just have to say, I think it's so awesome, Brielle, that you were an essential worker on the front lines, an essential medical hero, but then you felt like you needed to do more. And I agree with both what you and Tony have said. This is such a complicated time of so many things pulling at you. I mean, I was in the beginning, you know, doing my full-time student thing and being in Zoom fatigue and isolated from my fellow students. But at the same time, I had that same pull of like, I'm a medical professional. I need to get out there. I need to do something. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And I think that working on a unit last summer was helpful for me in feeling like I had a sense of contribution. I did some marching. I did some, there was a lot of mutual aid things that sprung up in my local community. And I went and delivered food and found out how fragile some people's housing is, that they would have to leave apartments within a week and we would lose them pretty regularly. So there was a time of all of us, I think, feeling isolated and pulled kind of at the same time. I'm thinking also of parishioners at the church that I was assigned to this last year, especially older folks who were very afraid to go out, also feeling very isolated and alone. And I did a couple of book clubs with these folks, and part of the thing was like getting people up to speed with the technology and getting them on Zoom and comfortable with it was kind of a significant intervention for some people. When I was in the hospital over the summer, I saw this even with young people that kind of more on the other end of, because of lack of resources, didn't have access to that technology, and they totally lost contact with their therapist and their psychiatrist, and isolated and decompensating. And so helping people with technology and access was a big part of how to help build community too.
I do also want to transition, because I think there's a topic that I'd like to bring up with all of our panelists. We are approaching Juneteenth. This time last year, we were also in the midst of marches and, Black Lives Matter. When we think about the LGBT community, we are made up of so many different beautiful identities. And now I hope everyone has had a chance to see a redesign of the Pride flag, which now includes intersex people as well. I'm wondering if each of you, and I don't want to assume anyone's racial or ethnic identity or identities at all, but I'm wondering if each of you could speak to maybe some advice you have or some life lessons you've learned, which is a huge question, but anything that you would have for people who hold multiple marginalized identities, who are just looking for a place to belong. So let's see, I'm hoping we can start with maybe Mary.
I'm going to try not to speak for other people, but more to speak for myself as a white person. I'm in a multicultural family. I'm the only white person in my family. My wife is Black. We have 2 daughters who are Black. And, but, just like every other white person, I think I've been open to how much more I have to learn about racism and white supremacy, and how much I continue to benefit from that and be complicit in it and to work on that. I can just say that as far as being a chapel minister, one of the things we do is try not to run chapel, but to be background facilitators and empower other folks to run chapel and have their own voice. So from prior to the pandemic, we did a Dia de Muertos chapel, but it was led by people who that was their culture, and that, we try to avoid appropriation and be the learners when it's not our thing. I think that's kind of the role that I try to take and try to get better at, is to lift other people's voices and let them say what they need and what kind of things they need to build community, and not be present if it's better that I'm not present. And I think what several of us said about multiple circles and needing to find your place in more than one place is relevant here too.
Thank you. Brielle?
Yeah, I totally agree with Mary. As someone who is white, I also think a lot about systemic racism and kind of my role in unintentionally uplifting and supporting that system and how we can work to dismantle that system of oppression. And the way that I see that my role, like kind of being within that system, is challenging people who are close to me who might not hold similar views, particularly like white family members of mine. I grew up in, like, my dad's side of the family is very Catholic, very religious, very like working class Brooklyn. They're all NYPD, sanitation. So a lot of the conversations around like defunding the police or like why the police are a system of oppression have been really real conversations because it speaks to their personal experience. And also, as you can imagine, are very difficult conversations because you're kind of speaking about a system, but can also be speaking directly about someone's identity. So I try to do my best to not force the conversations, but to create a space where like those conversations can and will be had. Just to, I guess, challenge people who are close to me to think differently about certain issues. And I feel like that's where I can have the most impact in this moment.
Thank you. And how about for you, Tony?
Yeah, this is a very touchy subject for me. Not only being of Mexican origin, and I try as I work with individuals, as we support individuals. I always talk about getting as much information as we need to have a conversation with others, whether it's about our healthcare, whether it's about discrimination, whether it's about oppression, whether it's about, if you have the information you need to be able to advocate for yourself, to learn what it means and how it affects us, I think it's important, right? As I've worked in different fields, and especially trying to work in my treatment, right? It's like, why doesn't the person across from me, why isn't that a reflection of who I am? Sometimes, it will be somebody white. Do they understand culture? Do they understand different aspects of of who I am, right? And so having those discussions with them, and talking about that no one has the answers for each other, right? We can come up with our own answers by having these conversations. So, as part of being in community, I've been involved with different groups that are addressing white supremacy, oppression, and race, right? Because I still have a lot to learn. If I'm asking to have a seat at the table, I want to make sure that I come prepared with my own lived experiences and from what I have shared, and I can have a fruitful discussion, and hopefully it can lead to everybody feeling good about themselves and in trying to advocate for ourselves.
Before I move on, I just wanted to thank each of our panelists for, I guess, their vulnerability and strength with this topic, because this can be very difficult conversations. And so I do want to thank each of you for being able to dive in. I also think this conversation just overall has been showing how resourceful and strong our communities are. And so I'm wondering how, and Mary, you had spoken to this before about the collective trauma that we've all kind of gone through. speaking to the strength, I'm wondering what each of your communities have been doing to work through or overcome the trauma that we have undergone. And I know each of you have spoken to this slightly, but I'm wondering just kind of like, how are people celebrating Pride? How are they overcoming the trauma that we've gone through? Let's see, oh, not started with in a while. Let's do Brielle.
Yeah, I guess for me as an intern, first year doctor fighting a pandemic, I think like what my community that immediately comes to mind is my co-resident class, just because we have the collective trauma of the pandemic. We have the collective trauma of being interns. We have the collective trauma of trying to navigate like a new system in a time where you can pretty much only interact with people over Zoom. So for me, the way that we have maintained strength and resilience and also vulnerability is actually through process group in residency, which is kind of interesting. I feel like having a space once every 2 weeks where we can all talk about whatever is on our mind, which a lot of the times is about stuff in the hospital, but oftentimes isn't, has been really helpful. And it's created almost like a trauma bond between all of us, and that we like feel very comfortable sharing and talking about different things and support each other through moments that are really hard. So for me, I think that has been the most important way that we as like a resident community have tried to build resilience.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I think through this community and conversations group that I've been doing, right? We come together and we're able to share our vulnerabilities. You know, we start with celebrations and gratitudes and you know, support each other and you know, talking about what life is after you know, this is all over, and you know, how are we gonna come together, right? We've been, you know, especially for this group, because we've been doing it virtually, and since this is a global group, it's like there's obviously no way we're going to be able to come together and see each other in one space, but I think just being able to support each other through our daily, you know, issues and crises.
And how about for you, Mary?
I think that I just graduated from Union, and we had a virtual graduation. It was during this transition time that they had to plan it, so they could not figure out how to get us together back in March when it was planned. But the school sent out little watch party packages, so we were all sitting there in our robes with the pom-poms and things and our families around. So there was that bit of ritual that was a celebratory thing. In the end of classes, in the last few weeks of classes, there was a racial incident on campus that it wasn't clear whether it was an outsider or an insider. We still to this day don't know. In either case, very disturbing. And kind of all of the trauma of the last year, of the fatigue of virtual classes, of the disorganized and kind of harsh way in which we had to evacuate our housing and got scattered, and it just all came to a head, and there was just this exhaustion and rage and grief that all came out. And the last couple weeks of chapels were very raw with that, where like each day there would be a preacher saying, we're so angry, and we're so, you know, like it was kind of showed that we had successfully built some kind of a community. And I'm sure it was uncomfortable for the school administration to be sitting there through chapel after chapel with a lot of rage expressed, but it was so helpful in that way. And then school is out now. There would normally be no chapel, but for Pride Month, we're having weekly Pride chapels with alumni. I did one this week. One of the staff did one last week, and again, I think has shown the importance, because normally this would be a school thing only, and it's kind of bled out into something bigger.
You beat me to the punch. I was about to ask, as we approach our close, how each of you are planning to celebrate Pride this month, especially with COVID restrictions slowly being lifted. So Mary, I know you started going into it, but I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you're celebrating Pride this year.
I'm not doing anything super special, but I have to say it makes me very proud. My daughter's in law school, and she's doing a summer internship in the city, and the firm had a Pride event thing that she is going to as an ally. I think there's nothing that could make me more proud as a gay mom. So
how about you, Tony?
Yeah, I don't think my husband and I don't have any plans. You know, certainly some weekend getaways this month, but you know, there's a local pub in our neighborhood that's you know, gay friendly, and so we'll probably just stop by and you know, celebrate with the locals there.
That's still fun. And Brielle?
Oh, I'm going all out. So context to that comment, in medical school, a lot of our board exams happen exactly around when Pride happens. So I haven't been able to attend Pride for the last couple of years. And my 4th year of medical school, I was going to be graduated, and that was going to be the time. But I was in the hospital working on COVID floors, so that didn't happen. So this is my year to shine. I'm going to the parade. I'm going to Stonewall. It's going to be fun. I am very excited about it.
Excellent. So yeah, I think I do want to give just a minute to see if anyone has any questions in the chat. I don't see any, but I'll give it about a minute. Okay. I'm also just, again, as we move to the end, I want to just thank all of our panelists for your strength, your vulnerability, and engaging in these conversations. Just by existing, we're showing our pride. I want to thank each of you for your work, Trevor Project, among other things, on top of everything. Yeah, I'm wondering if any of the organizers have anything they'd like to add before we wrap up.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. It was really inspiring to hear everyone's stories, and I really felt very honored and privileged to be a part of this group and listen to everyone. So thank you so much to all our attendees and our panelists. We look forward to organizing more wonderful events like this. So watch out for more events.
Yeah, I just wanted to say again a big, huge thank you. It's been really inspiring to listen to you all share your stories, and I feel like, you know, for me personally, I didn't know that I needed this, but I did today, and I really thank you for sharing. And thank you everyone for coming.
And with that, I think we have reached the end of our conversation today. So on behalf of this panel, I want to wish everyone a wonderfully safe and happy Pride. And yeah, goodbye everyone, and thank you for joining.
And a big thank you to Victor. You've done a wonderful job moderating, and we couldn't have asked for a better moderator.
Thank you.